We've mentioned in class before, and I've mentioned it in tutorials before, that a line can have many different names, but it still remains the same line. Just like you, or just like I, can be called different things by different people, but I'm still the same person. So this line that Rakisha is talking about is the same line, it's the same linear function represented by this equation. But James isn't convinced that those two equations are the same thing. So Rakisha and we are going to help James understand how that can be so. So what you're doing is you're starting with this explicit sequence. So when we were studying sequences last semester, this is how we wrote the sequences for arithmetic functions. So we're going to start with that. And even though it says a sub n equals -2 plus 5 times n minus 1, I'm going to start by writing my output of a sub n as the output y, and then in place of n, I'm going to put an x. And that's just because we can use y to represent an output variable, and we can use x to represent an input variable. We could have used other letters. We could have used A and B, or Q and P, or T and S. I mean, we could use whatever variables we wanted. But because we often have tables and label them with the input of X and the output of Y, it kind of makes sense, right, to use X and Y. So input, output. So our first step is that we substituted a y in place of a sub n, and we substituted an x in place of n. So that's the first step. So I'm going to shorten my explanation. I'm going to put that we turned a sub n into y, and we turned the n into an x. It would be better to write this in words, but I'm going to substitute it for this tutorial. You can put it into words. Okay? Now the next step is we're just going to use algebra. From here on out, it's just algebra. So let's do this first. I see there's this 5 outside parentheses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute 5 times x and then 5 times -1. So I am going to, for my second step, I'm going to distribute. And I'm just going to put distrib, but I'm going to let you write it out. Distribute. Okay. So I'm going to distribute, and that is going to get me y equals -2 plus 5x minus 5, because 5 times x is 5x, and 5 times -1 is -5. Now our third step is going to be to combine like terms. And what combining like terms means is that we're going to combine any numbers that don't have variables. Those are called constants. We're going to combine our constants with each other. So we're going to do -2 plus -5, or you could also think about it as -2 minus 5. And then if there were any other like terms that also had an x as a variable, we would also combine those. So once I combine like terms, I'm going to get -7 plus 5x. Now we're almost there. If you compare this to this, we're very close. We just need to flip the -7 and the 5x into reverse order. Fortunately, there is a property that lets us do that. And if you can't remember, if it's on the tip of your tongue, but you can't remember what it is, it starts with a C. You might be thinking of it now that you see the M's. It's called commutative. So there's a property called the commutative property. And what that means, the commutative property, is that when we're adding or when we're multiplying, we can add or we can multiply in whichever order we want. Because 2 plus 3, for example, is the same as 3 plus 2. 8 times 5 is the same as 5 times 8. You'll get the same sum or the same product. So the commutative property tells us that we can flip this addition into a different order. So the key thing to remember, see how it's addition? And we're adding a positive and a negative. If you look at this, we can think of this as adding still, because subtracting is the same as adding a negative. The important thing to notice is that we still have a positive 5x, and we still have -7. So these two expressions, these two equations are equivalent. The next thing that you're going to do on this assignment is you're going to, now that you've verified that this equation is the same, what you're going to do is you're going to plug in or substitute these inputs and see what outputs you get. So real quickly, here's the example. Your equation is y equals 5x minus 7. Okay. What you're going to do is you're going to, in place of the x, you're going to put these different inputs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's start with 1. So in place of where that x was, you're going to put the 1. 5 times 1 is 5. 5 minus 7 equals -2. And then you're going to graph that point of 1, that's our input, -2 on this graph. So 1 is right here, -2 is right here. So you're going to graph your point. Then you're going to go on to the next. So we're going to graph a different point. The next input that we're putting in is 2. So we'll have 5 times 2 minus 7. 5 times 2 is 10. So we'll have y equals 10 minus 7. And that's going to come out to 3. So the point that we'll be graphing is 2, 3. Input, output. So 2, 3. 2, and then 3 is right here. Now when you graph this, if you do it correctly, if you do it, I shouldn't say correctly, it's okay to make mistakes, right? But if you do it accurately and correctly, you're going to get a line that goes forever in that direction and forever in this direction. If you want to show forever, you could put a little arrow or point on the end of it. So here's your representation of forever. So that's what you're doing to wrap up this assignment.